Well, guys, Bible, hope you got one. Would you make your way to the book of Ecclesiastes? We are in chapter 3 tonight. Wednesday nights, that's what we get a chance to do, is work through the Bible about a chapter at a time. And so we're excited to be here. We're excited to be in the space that God would do that. We're going to work through this whole chapter, and long that God would take the truths that are here and meet you, but again, inviting you to have it. Bible open. There's ones in front of you. You need it. Electronically works one way or another. Have it. Join us. Same online. Same in the overflow. Invite you to the Word. Invite you that God would meet you and speak to you and work in you that which He has in store for you. So with that in mind, let's ask Him. Let's just ask Him that He would help us right now, that He'd give us favor and understanding and ability to both comprehend what's in front of us, but it would work good in us. Father, here we are, getting a chance to dive into your Word. Think about how you describe it as food for our soul, and how you invite us to be those who, in that sense, dive into the meat of your Word and find it to be that which feeds us and nourishes us and works good in us. Would you help us to be there? Would you draw us to the table, as it were? Would you help us even right now to be able to partake and digest, and then through this that you would strengthen our soul and that you'd work good in us through your Word, believing in your Word's ability to do that. Just praying you'd help us to hear your voice tonight and you would work good in this. We pray for that together in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Seasons. Life has seasons. Hey, it's no surprise. I know that you know that. You understand seasons of the year, the way it moves through the year, where we have, winter and then spring and then summer and then fall and then winter again. And life moves in this space of different seasons. And though there are seasons of the year, there are seasons of the soul. There are seasons of life. There's seasons that work through that in many ways they just move. Sometimes they're so very different than another, that one space in life can be an entirely different space to another, and finding how you manage that, how you walk through that, is part of the focus of this chapter. Well, before we dive right in, though, we need to back up for just a quick moment and make sure that we're on the same page and at least have a little bit of the perspective. Ecclesiastes is this amazing book that invites us to look at life through a lens that will help us see both its value and point and space. Its perspective is a challenging one. Kind of in a philosophical way, it invites us to look at life, as it will say almost 30 times through this letter, under the sun. Under the sun. The concept is profound and maybe not terribly hard, but I hope we can get there. It just says, okay, let's imagine it. Let's imagine that there is no God. There is no heaven. There is no hell. What do you do with life? Where is life? How does that work? And many in our world live exactly this way. Solomon is not saying that's true. He's not putting those, values as if, hey, this is true. He's just saying, okay, well, let's just talk about life from here. Let's just take what's in front of us, and his big premise, the big premise of the entire book is if you do that, if you leave God out, if you leave heaven and hell out, life is empty. Life is vanity of vanity. It is empty. You find no point, no satisfaction, no value. It ultimately becomes meaningless. Ultimately becomes that which isn't there. It's a profound reality and invites you to kind of look at it with that way and see that. Well, if you've been with us so far, we saw the beginning launch of that in chapter 1 where he explained that a little bit. And then starting at the end of chapter 1 and through chapter 2, he took us on a journey. He took us on a journey of very powerful perspective where with an intensity and an exhaustive search, Solomon took a look at everything that's here. Everything that people say, okay, this is what makes life fun. This is what makes life meaningful. This is what makes life valuable. And in chapter 1, at the end of it, and through chapter 2, we just saw that it doesn't work. He says it's vanity if you try to find life in wisdom or pleasure or being distracted, or success, or riches, or fame. He says, if these become what you live for, if these things become what gets you out of bed in the morning, if these things become that which you would say, that's my goal. Like, I want more money, or I want to be famous, or I want, I want pleasure, or I want distraction, or I want, what he says, if you want that, you'll find yourself chasing the wind. You can never catch it. You're pursuing something that is never attainable, that has nothing that would really satisfy you when you get there. And so he gave us that perspective and that place that's in the midst of it, that he looked upon it as the wisest man that ever lived, the one that had the ability to fully search those things out, and he's just trying to tell us, hey, if you're looking for that, there's no meaning there, there's no satisfaction. That said, it's not as if we looked at these things and said, hey, these things are all evil. They're just not life. They're not what satisfies. And so if you were with us last week, he took us on a different perspective and said, the thing is that the key for living life in this broken, vain, kind of topsy-turvy world is to just enjoy it. Don't live for these things, but you could find just kind of, I used a silly illustration that I often use in my own life, that if you take all these things like a paper plate, if they're just things, it's like it works, it's helpful when you can use it, when it's gone, no big deal. He says, if that's how you can handle wisdom or pleasure, distraction, success, if that's how you can handle your money, if that's how you can handle fame, then it will be good. Like, you'll be able to say, okay, if it's there, great. If not there, fine. Didn't really need it anyway. It wasn't really my life. My life is found somewhere else. And he invited us to a way of doing that. That in one sense, as he looked on all of these things, he's telling us there's a right way to handle that. Now, that's important because in some ways, he just wants to take that thought and press it a little bit deeper into us and help us process it through. That really is the majority of what's found here in chapter 3. This space where he's going to tell us, hey, there's a key to enjoy the works under the sun. Now, not to be too complicated, I hope not, but as we get into this, understand this, he's going to kind of, go back to our premise and say, okay, well, let's bring God back into the picture. Let's talk about what God wants for these things in our life. We're still not talking about heaven. We're still not talking about hell. We're not talking about eternity. We're not talking about seeing God. We're just talking about, so what did God want for, how do we handle this? How do we handle life and do it in the right way? And so he's going to invite us on a journey to see that. And again, it's going to be our key theme that we'll work through in the midst of this. As he gets there, let's go back and see it just for the sake of context. We'll begin there in chapter 2. And I'll just say it this way, beginning in verse 24. He says, nothing is better for a man that he should eat and drink, and that his soul should enjoy good in his labor. This I saw was from the hand of God. For who can eat or who can have enjoyment more than I? For God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who's good in his sight, but to the sinner who's pursuing life and all those things, he gives the work of gathering and collecting, that he may give to him who's good before God. This is where it works. He says, and this is still an emptiness, a vanity, a grasping after the wind. Then in chapter 3, verse 1, he begins with a familiar poem that some of you would know well. He says, to everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. We get a chance to dive into this, and he begins on this kind of poetic journey of kind of the rhythms, the randomness, the seasons of life. For some of you, you're going to hear the birds singing the song, For everything, turn, turn, turn. You're going to hear this old kind of song kind of playing in the midst of it. It is powerfully and prophetic. It is this picture that isn't saying that we do any of these things. It's just saying, hey, life is like this. Life has seasons, and they move from one extreme to the other. So just journey through it, the kind of poem with me, and just this perspective, just starting again in verse 1, to everything. There is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. There's a time to be born, and there's a time to die. Kind of the two, pillars of our life, the beginning and ending, down to here. It says there's time to plant, and there's a time to pluck up what's planted, to reap that which is there. True in harvesting, true in life. There's spaces where you're investing, there's spaces where you're receiving. There's a time to kill, and there's a time to heal. He's not talking about murder here. He's not telling you, hey, you can, kind of deal with things. But he is saying there are spaces of this where you deal with it. In fact, I don't want to, dredge up any horrible things, but I just know, life is this way. For some of you, if you think about it with people, or maybe you'd even think about it with animals, hey, there's a time. There's a time when out of love and space, life comes in and you have lovingly put down an animal. Then there's other times you're like, no, we are fighting for their life. There's time to heal. That life has different seasons. They find themselves, drawing us into different spaces where it invites us into different activities where we find ourselves doing life very, very differently. There's a time to build up. There's a time to break down, and there's a time to build up. There's a time when we just need to tear down things in our lives, tear down things there. There's other times of building. Very different seasons that are there. There's a time to weep, and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance. Life has seasons. Some seasons that are sad and sorrowful, some that are just joyful, like there's fun. Hey, this is laughter, or it's a time of joy. There's a time to cast away stones, and there's time to gather stones. Stones sometimes have purpose that, would be gathering them in those days to build. There were other times when you didn't need stones, and you're getting rid of them. And there's life that is that way, where it has these spaces of gathering and pushing away. There's a time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. There's times where we make connections with people, and there's other times like, no, that's not a good season. It's not happening in this space and places where we don't. It's a time to gain, and a time to lose. Time to keep and a time to throw away. Different spaces that work in either. There's a time to tear and there's time to sow. It's time when you're dealing with something, it's like, okay, this is rags. Like we're tearing it up, and there's other times like I can fix it. I can fix it. This is repairable. It says there's a time to keep silent, and there's a time to speak. There's a time to love, and there is a time to hate, and there is. Hey, God hates sin, and if you don't hate, that's actually probably more problematic than not. There are things, God says those who love evil, we hate wickedness. And he says there's things you love, there's things like, that's terrible, I hate that. There's a time of war where it has to happen in our world, and there's a time of peace. Hey, we walk through this quick list, and in one sense, he's not enjoining that this would be something you're like, okay, that's what I got to do. That's not it. He's just saying life finds itself in seasons. It finds itself where out of your control, outside of your ability, it's in one season and then it's in another season. And you find yourself moving from one end of the spectrum to the other end of the spectrum in life, and life moves in rhythm. It moves sometimes like the cycles of a year. It's like, okay, it was we were there last year and they were there again, and things were moving. Sometimes it happens in spaces. It works in ways that are just a part of it. And so Solomon asked the question, like, what do we do with that? How do we handle the variety, the rhythm, the very seasons of life that in this broken world are a part of it? He says it this way in verse 9. What profit has the worker from that which he labors? He says, I've seen it. I've seen this God-given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied. What's the value? How do we do this? So that's what we want to answer. But again, I draw your attention to it. Maybe you never think about these things. Maybe they're not processes that you think through, but maybe some of you have. And you're like, it's just weird. Life has seasons. A year ago it was different. 5 years ago, it was very different than where we are now. Life's different than what it was before. I didn't choose some of these things. Life found me in this space, and now I'm doing it differently than I was then because life has changed. And if God gives us space, it'll continue changing. Where you'll be in 6 months from now, a year from now, it might be circumstantially very, very different from where you are now. And so finding this place of looking and saying, so what do you do with that? How do we look at life in its complexity down here and trying to find hope? No, we're not investing in any of those things ourselves. How do we do that? Well, he gives us a few thoughts that are powerful, deep, more than I can go into, but our goal is to kind of see them as an overview in this chapter, and I hope that they're helpful. For the first one, he just tells us at the first part of verse 11, says he, God, has made everything beautiful in its time. That's one of those profound statements that finds itself incredibly rich, that he just looks at it and says, God's working. God is working. He's doing something and making everything beautiful. Hey, as a total aside, kind of maybe even totally distracting, sorry if I'm going to distract anybody, but I just thought I would tell you, hey, I don't know if you've seen it. There's a movie that's out right now, and it's kind of about kind of King and Country and Rebecca St. James, who wrote that song. He makes everything beautiful. And just want to tell you, hey, it's still in theater. It'll be in theater for even this next week, I think, or at least through the weekend. Kind of a good story of faith, a good space of it, and kind of just fun, because it was kind of like that. It really centers around this thought of God working, and how he takes life and makes it beautiful in his time. And it's just a worthwhile kind of pass. And so, sorry if that was distracting, but let's come back to it and let's talk about it biblically. Well, certainly maybe one of the key verses that some of you have even thought about when you read that is that Romans 8:28, where God tells us that we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. It's a great verse. It's got a lot of depth to it. Let's just quickly walk through it. This isn't a promise for everybody. It's a promise for God's people. In fact, that's kind of what Solomon had just ended the last chapter. Like, hey, this works if you find your life in God. For the person who's a sinner, it doesn't work. Like, it doesn't work for them. They spend their whole life, trying to gain money, but they only benefit believers. I mean, because the only ones who can actually have life are believers, or people that know God. And this promise is for those who are called according to his purpose, which are Christians. If we're his, he just gives us this profound and wild and wonderful thought. All things are working together for good. There's not anything that's happening in our life that God wastes. There's not anything happening in our life that has no value, that would look upon and say, well, that was a wasted season. Like, that moment in my life had no value. Like, that has no good. That has no space in it. That is never true for us. Now, much of it we'll never understand, not till we get to heaven. But he's just inviting us to see it. So life has seasons. And if you can handle those seasons well, then you begin to say, okay, whatever the season is, God's doing something. God's doing something. He's working some good purpose for his kingdom, for his glory, for his things. There's going to be something in this. And all by itself, that can change some seasons. I know that you may know this, and maybe it's just real to you, but I want to try to say it again. One of the most difficult things is when you don't believe this. And you're going through something, and maybe it's really, really hard. Or maybe it's just really, really boring. Or maybe you don't understand it. And then there's this moment when you look, and if you could think, that's meaningless. That has no value. Like, I've just wasted a day. I've wasted a year. I've wasted a decade. Like, that didn't mean anything. That whole space. If you believe that, there is a void that just crushes. And God just invites you not to believe it. He's not asking you to figure it out. I mean, if you said it's like, well, what good is going to come out of this? I don't know. He just said all. He just said all things work together for good. I mean, he just said everything. Everything. God can make something beautiful. He works beauty through it. He's doing something through our lives, and so he invites us to recognize he's working. That's huge. And again, if that's the only thing you got from this whole evening, it would be worth your being here this evening. If you would believe that, if you would believe in the faithfulness of our God, that he's working it. It's not selfish. I'm not saying he's always working it for our point, but he's working it for his space, and that's worthwhile. Well, not only does he make everything beautiful in his time in verse 11, he also says, and he's put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. So he looks on this whole thing and he says, here's what I've done. I've put eternity in your hearts. I've done something so even as you touch something, even as you touch life, there is almost this innate, built-in thing that God has done that tells us there's more than this. Like, this is touching eternity, though I can't see it. And again, that's what he says. We don't know it. Like, it's unknowable down here. We're left in this perspective under the sun, and so we can't see heaven, hell. We don't see any of that, but there's a space there that you can almost feel it. Now, this verse alone has such profound ramifications. I just toss out a couple, and then we'll keep moving. Don Richardson, who is a missionary, wrote a book that he titled it from this verse, just Eternity in Their Hearts, and he premised that God has built into humankind a hunger for eternity and almost an innate just space of the gospel. That somehow that there's a reality that in cultures that are many times tribal or whatever, somehow even in there, just the way that there's almost always this gospel reality, that people are hungry for the gospel. That even though they don't know it, even though they don't even realize what they're doing, they're hungry for it. Hey, silliness, but let me just kind of give it to you. I think about it even in movies and books. J.R. Tolkien said that, all storytellers, whether they realize it or not, are telling the same story. That they don't even realize what they're doing. They don't even realize they're attracted to it. And it's funny. I mean, maybe they think they're mocking God, and maybe they are. But I got to tell you, it's wild to watch how many stories have the story of redemption, have the story of judgment, and how many stories, play with the Antichrist or evil or whatever it is. And somehow you just look at it and think, you can't even help yourself. Like you're trying to, tell a story, and you're still telling the story. You don't even know you're doing it, but there's some hungry part of man that is always longing for this. And so Don Richardson says, hey, people are hungry for the gospel. And I'll just say it this way. You are. You're looking for that. If you're here tonight, you don't know Jesus. He has built it inside of you, that some imprint is there. There's an eternity. There's a hollowness to your soul that longs for what only the gospel and what only God can do in Christ that would bring life. I think about it. Augustine had said it this way when he looked at that. He says, Lord, you've made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you. There's this empty, broken space that finds this longing for something that nothing else can fill. Pascal said it this way. Blaise Pascal said, there's a God-shaped vacuum in the heart of every man, which cannot be filled by any created thing, but only by God, the Creator, made known through Jesus and in profound ways. It's just true. There's an emptiness. There's a hollowness. There's a hunger for eternity that only He can fill. And again, we get the beauty of the revelation of Christ. We get to know not only the whole that Solomon describes here, but the one who fills it, the one who that we're made for Christ. And again, I just offer that to you. It's Christ that we're looking for. It's Christ that's there. And yet we come back to what Solomon's saying is you can feel it, but he says, even here you just can't see it. There's a space, we have this eternity that we know just by the rhythm of life, by the things of life, there's something there, but it is invisible to us. And it is. It still is known by faith to us, not by sight. There's not anybody that kind of said, hey, I'm going to take my vacation in heaven. I thought I'd just take a vacation, come to heaven, come back in 2 weeks, and I'll tell you guys about it. It doesn't work that way. We live by faith. We live, okay, I'm looking forward to something I don't yet see, but I'm trusting, and I know it's there, and there's a hunger for that he tells us that is there. Well, with that, it's through that he comes back to his premise. And so he tells it to us this way in verse 12. He says, I know that nothing is better for them to rejoice and do good in their lives, and that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of his labor. It is the gift of God. He's inviting us again to look at life and whatever seasons, whatever they are, to say, okay, God, I want to walk in it. Now, let me quickly say what he's not saying. Paul's going to talk about those who are heathens and look at life, and they'll say, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Hey, just live it up, enjoy pleasure, because there is nothing else. That's not what Solomon's saying. I mean, that's just total hedonism. It's total kind of going into that space. It's not satisfying. What he's telling us is not that. He's saying God gives life. He's the giver of life. He's the one that does it. And so life has seasons. It has seasons, and it's beautiful in its time. There's eternity in it, but we're meant to enjoy it. He says, I know this is better, nothing better than this, than just to rejoice and do good in their lives, and that every man should eat and drink and just enjoy. Enjoy the good. Enjoy the good of his labors. It's the gift of God. the invitation, he's going to come back to this a number of times in the book of Ecclesiastes, so I hope it will land more and more as we work through it. It's just to embrace life here and now. It's like life has seasons, and you're in a season. And you could, spend all your time complaining that you're in the season you are. Like, I don't like this season. I don't like this. This is not fun. It was more fun in the previous part of life. You could do that, but you're not there. He says the great thing you can do is just say, here I am. Okay, God, this is where I am. This is the life it is. It's the season that's in front of me. And so, Lord, I just want to step to it and say, okay, God, what do you have? What are you giving? What's in the midst of that? And says, I'm just going to try to enjoy whatever is in these spaces here, because it is the space that life has found me in. You could spend all your time. For some of you, it's the loss of a spouse. For some of you, it's the loss of a kid or parent. For some of you, it's just life is different. And you're like, man, I liked having little kids at home. Boy, I loved that season. That was great. And some of you are like, man, I can't wait till that season's done. But we can always be in this space of wishing we were in a different season than we are. And saying, that was more fun, or that will be more fun. And Solomon's just like, no. If you get life, and that life isn't found in those anyway, the meaning of life is not found in money or success or fame, then enjoy whatever it is. Whatever you are. Just say, okay, God, this is where I am. Okay. It's a different season. It's not the season I was in, but there's joys to be found in this moment. There's things that can satisfy in this moment, whatever that is. So I spend all my time just hating the season I'm in. I'm going to recognize the gifts that are in this moment. And he's just saying that's a better way to handle life in its variety. Add to that, not only is it meant to be enjoyed, but there is a sense, and obviously in the midst of this, both seeing as a gift of God, to see God's sovereign hand in the midst of this. And he does it in a profound verse. He says it this way. He says, I know, verse 14, that whatever God does, it shall be forever. I mean, when God makes it, things stand. I know that nothing can be added to it. You can't take what God has done and increase it, and God does it. And then nothing can be taken from it. God does it that men should fear before him. God is God, and that's one of the incredible realities in this. He's sovereign. Like he's the one that really is over time and space. And there are things that we, in our finiteness, cannot change. So let's just talk about weather for a moment. It's bigger than weather, but for some of you, you might be one of those people that's like, I could do without summer. Like, I'm going to argue, like, we should just have, like, spring, and then we should go straight to fall, and then we can have winter again. Like, summer is brutal. And there's somebody else here that's like, no. You're like, no winter. Like, I want to go, like, fall, spring, summer. Like, and I hate those seasons. And, here's the thing. You can move. You can find some place that probably has those things. That's true geographically, but it's not true in life. There are things that you just cannot avoid. There are seasons that come, and there's nothing you can do about it. There's no space that you can be like, okay, I'm going to hold my breath, in this season until God changes it. Like, I don't like this season of life, and so God is God, and He's sovereign. He's worked. He's working what He is, and ultimately the power that is everything that He's doing that would include, obviously, His beginning, His end, the gospel, the wonder of it. He is working. And there is this space where you just recognize this. And you recognize, God, you're God, and you are over. And, in the seasons that life has, in the entire poem that he walked us through, times to be born, times to die, times to heal, times that you take, times to go away. There are just seasons that He's allowed. And He has allowed it. And you could find yourself railing against heaven. And what a pointless endeavor. Like, somehow, your protest is going to change. It doesn't. And so there's a place of just coming and saying, okay, God, you're God. You're a God of seasons. You're a God who orchestrates, and you put seasons into life. And you come into this place that just says, I know that God is forever. And there's a sense of just coming and fearing Him and recognizing He is God. And He's over it. And in the midst of that, there is a space of understanding there's judgment coming. Again, he's not taking us there. He's not letting us know heaven or hell. That's not the perspective, but there is still a sense that God is just, and he's going to deal with it. And so he gives it to us in a couple ways. Verse 15, he says, which has already been, and what is that which has already been and what is to be has already been, and God requires an account of what is past. So he's looking at life and all it is, that in its rhythms, its spaces, and he tells us there's nothing new under the sun. Everything's kind of moving, but God's going to hold an account to that. That he is going to be a God that deals in justice and righteousness with everything. He's holding an account to that. Now, as he's thinking about this, Solomon just quickly dives into something that he's going to come back to more in Ecclesiastes, but in verse 6 he says it this way. He says, moreover, I saw that under the sun, like life here, life under the sun, in the place of judgment, wickedness was there. In the place of righteousness, iniquity was there. Simply put, life isn't fair. It's not fair, and it's not being handled right in our world. It's not being handled right anywhere in our world. If you think it's just the United States, boy, you don't know the rest of the world. If you think it was just this moment and they did better in the 50s, you don't know the 50s. If you could look and think that somehow men have handled it right, they have not. We poison everything we touch. We mess up everything. And he says, so you're looking for somebody who's supposed to be, bringing in justice, and whether that be, in legal ways and in just different, police or whatever. It says there's times that you look there, and it's not that all of it, but it says there's wickedness, like they're doing it wrong. Then you say, okay, well, I'm going to go over to righteousness. I'm going to go and look for people who are supposed to be good and even godly, and then you'll find there's wickedness. Some of those places. There's this brokenness in mankind that just lets us know that accounts are not being settled yet, that justice is not yet being distributed. God is not working that through the affairs of men. That's not the way it works, but he's going to do it. He comes back to this, and he says it in verse 17. I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there's a time for every work and every purpose for every work. God's going to do this. God's going to he's going to deal with this. Like there's a way of looking at this and just knowing he will. Again, we're not seeing what it is. He's not talking about hell, not talking about heaven yet. That's obviously a little bit implied, but it is still a place of looking at it. So let's just talk about this for a second. Seasons. They're different. There's sometimes when you find these things to be so, and you find life to be hard and unfair. And sometimes people in power, unfair. Sometimes things happening, and the question is, what are you going to do with that? I mean, how are you going to handle that when you're going to get there? Are you going to come face to face with something and go, well, meaningless, like what do we do with all this? Or are you going to be able to come and say, God, you're God. Like this, this may look like how it is today, but this is not the way it's always going to be. This is not the way it's always going to work out. God, you're God. You're sovereign. You're over everything, and I know. I can look on wickedness and say to everyone who's walking in that, you're not going to get away with that. You might be getting away with it in our world. You're not going to get away with that. You're going to stand before God, and that's a fearful moment. And yet it's a good kind of, it's just a way where he's just telling us, this is how you handle seasons. This is how you handle some of that you just know, that you look on it and say, okay, God's working everything. It's turning in our hearts. We're just going to receive it as a gift and trust in God's sovereignty, trust in his justice, that he's going to be the one that brings all of this to pass. As he's processing this, he comes back to a thought that he'd given. I didn't even kind of put it out when I did the outline a minute ago, but when he first said he'd done this exhaustive search of what satisfies, what doesn't satisfy, and he told us nothing satisfies. And he ended up saying, okay, we just got to enjoy life. Right there in the midst of it, he tosses in one of the realities that we spent some time on last week, we'll continue to spend time on, and that's death. Now, he continues to talk about death and just this unstoppable season that is in life, and it's coming for all of us. He said it this way in verse 18. I said in my heart, concerning the condition of the sons of men, God tests them, that they may see themselves are like animals. For what happens to the sons of men also happens to animals. One thing befalls them. As one dies, so dies the other. Surely they all have one breath, and man has no advantage over animals, for all is vanity. All go to one place. All are from the dust, and all return to the dust. Okay, let's unpack this just for a moment. Make sure you're tracking. Hey, this is Ecclesiastes. This is a book that he's challenging us to see life under the sun. We're not talking about eternity. We're not talking about heaven or hell. He's just talking about life that is visible. So there's nothing here in these verses that's explaining the afterlife or explaining, that's not the concept. He's just talking about life. And he says, here's one of the problems. Everything and everyone dies. If it's an animal, if it's a person, they all die. They all die. And it's not any different. This is one of his premises that was in the previous chapter. You know, if you're rich, you're going to die. If you're poor, you're going to die. If you're famous, you're going to die. If you're not famous, you're going to die. There is no escape, and it's not fair. I mean, he'll talk more about this in the place. If you're really, really godly, doesn't mean you get a long life. If you're really, really wicked, doesn't mean you get a short life. Life is random, death is uncertain, and everything dies. Like, everything dies. So people die, animals die, all that's there. And he just lets us know as we're watching all of this, he says, you know, there in verse 20, all go to one place. All are from the dust, and all of them are just returning to the dust. All of them are there. We can't see what's happening. He gives us a thought there in verse 21. He says, who knows? Like, he's not saying this is the way it is. He's just, like, how do we see it? How could we understand what's happening? He knows the spirit of the sons of men, which, I mean, do they go up? You know, and the spirit of the animal, does that go down to the earth? This isn't a teaching on that. He's not saying that's what happens. He's just saying it's invisible. And maybe you know this. I mean, I wish I could say this and make this more clear. But some of you, I don't know how to say this. Try this. I wonder how many funerals you've been to. I wonder how many graveside services you've been to. You know, people die. There is no way to look and say, there's no visible space that says, okay, this person went to heaven and that person went to hell. You just don't do it. I mean, it's not like there's kind of like, okay, the grave glows, you know, if it's, you know, one or the other. It's like they just die. And if you've buried an animal, it's actually so much the same. I mean, they're there, and all of a sudden they're not. And there's a rhythm to it and an emptiness to it and a problem to it. And Solomon says, boy, death, it is so destructive and it is so confusing. Again, we talked about it in greater detail last week. If you missed it, you may want to go back to it. It is our great enemy. The fear of death consumes us whether we know it or not because it's just so confusing. It's just so troubling. And he says, death is this kind of problematic thing. You're just going to die. Like, you're going to die and you don't even see what's happening. Like, you can't see that. And so you just know it's coming. I mean, that right now you just know it's coming. And I think that if we can just be honest, I don't think there's anybody here in this room that doesn't know it. But let me just say it as clear as I can. If Jesus doesn't come back, you're going to die. There's nobody in this room right now that's like, actually, I was thinking about not. I just decided it didn't sound like a good season. Thought I would skip that one. You know, kind of just, it is a coming moment for you. And how you face that season is really determinative. Again, if you have looked for life in money or your job or success, then death is the scariest thing ever. If these are the value systems that you live by, death destroys everything. And he says, when you watch this, you look and say, it destroys all of that, and you can't even see what's happening. I mean, we know from the New Testament. We know what the Bible tells us. If you're a follower of Jesus, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. I mean, we get to be with Jesus. Heaven's coming. It's going to be glorious. But nobody can see that. I mean, there is nobody here this evening is like, man, I took my vacation, went and saw my loved one in heaven, brought back some snapshots. It was really, really cool. You just can't see it. It's invisible to us right now. All we can see is that death is approaching. And so he's inviting us to kind of allow that reality to shape the way we handle life. Okay, we'll come back to that for a moment, but this kind of gives a quick moment to try to answer a question or get myself in trouble by not answering a question, but let me give it a shot. So where exactly do animals go? Do animals go to heaven? Well, let me be as clear as I possibly can and do my best to answer. The Bible never says. There is no verse, there is no space that God explains this clearly. He just doesn't do it. If you think there is, I just want to tell you, not so much. I know there's a lot of churches that will do different things on it, and I know there's, whatever. The Bible doesn't say. So what happens to animals? Do animals go to heaven? Well, let me again say the Bible doesn't say, so anything from this point is just pure opinion. So I'm even going to step over here. So I'm off the screen. So I'll step over here. This is just opinion. I don't think all animals go to heaven. I just don't. Because if all animals go to heaven, that's a lot of mosquitoes. That's a lot of flies. I mean, like, heaven would be like mostly mosquitoes. And because they don't have a little bitty lifespan, and if all mosquitoes live forever, I'm not looking forward to this as much. You know, I just don't think all animals go to heaven. I just don't. But animals are going to be. We know the animals in the millennium. We know that there is this, and so it's part of God's good design. So what about, the animals that you have or you have loved? Again, I just want to be clear, the Bible doesn't say. But I will tell you this. There have been some that have just kind of said, there's something about the salvation that God does for us, that he does good in us and his love for us and the love that we have for some of those animals, that would not be surprising if those animals that you have loved, that you have cared for, that God, because he's good, because he loves you, says, well, not all animals are going to go to heaven, but yours will, because I love you. It's not the animal, it's you. Is that the way it's going to happen? I don't know. Don't take my word for it. I'm just going to tell you, it's not going to be surprising. Like, when we get to heaven, I'm just not going to be surprised if God doesn't go, I have loved you. I've loved you for everything I've given you, and and if it's not, you're going to be fine. I mean, you're going to be fine. You're going to be able to trust him. I know that's troubling, but just want to tell you, you're going to be fine, but there is a space of troubling, but he's not saying this here. So let me kind of back up here. So Solomon's not telling us that all animals don't go, because he's not talking about heaven and hell. That's not even in the premise. He's just telling us death happens. Death happens, and we can't figure it out. Okay, so I know that for somebody, you have questions. You can ask if you're mad. I love you. I really, really do. I care. I trust God. I think you can trust him too, but don't try to make more out of his word than is there. Okay, so what do we do with this? What do we do with this unrelenting death that's coming for you? Well, that's the point. That's why he's telling us, here's what you do. He says, so I perceived, verse 22, nothing is better than for a man that he should rejoice in his own works. It's his heritage. It's his portion. It's what God gives him. For who can bring him to see what will happen after him? Like, you don't know. You don't know where it's going. Here's what I know. Just rejoice in where you are. Like, live for that moment. Say, God, I'm just going to walk in this reality, and that's what he's calling to. So putting this back in the premise of it all, that's what he's been arguing. Again, if that makes a little bit of sense, he'd ended chapter 2 by saying, you can't live for these things, but you can enjoy them. Life is random. It's got so many seasons, but you can enjoy them. You can enjoy those seasons, and even death, it is coming. And you could live every day afraid of it, or you could just know it's coming. Just say, okay, I'm going to enjoy whatever seasons there are till then. I know it's coming. I know that God knows what he's doing. I trust him in that. But to live, in this place of being afraid that I'm going to die, it would make me where I can't live today. If I have the right view of that, then I'm able to just embrace life, whatever it is. It's not that it's always good. Not every season's fun. If we could look through it, there are seasons of death. There are, spring, summer, winter, fall. There are seasons that are just not fun. Not as a whole. Way hot. And enjoy life, but where I'm trying to tell you that's perfectly, but I get it. They're found in here. Life you can't fight to get them. Leave them. It's going to satisfy you. This is this season. Or maybe you love this season for you. Enjoy it. And then when it goes, be like, okay, there goes. It's fine. I knew death is coming. I knew it's empty, but I'm not. And if you fully know it's obviously in the midst of it, hey, I'm just going to enjoy what's there. I'm going to take the moment I have and say it's good. Looking for life in those because they're going to go away tomorrow. Yeah, whether it be money or houses or fame or whatever, it's gone. And it's fine. I didn't need it anyway. And my life wasn't in that. And so I can handle life in a whole different way that finds a space where he says, here's the thing, you can enjoy it. You can enjoy it. Or as he says it this way as we close, he just simply says it this way. He says, I perceive that nothing's better for a man that he should just rejoice in his own works. If I can say it in a different way, in your season, not comparing it to somebody else's season or even a season that you had before or after, just rejoice in that. It's his heritage. It's his portion. It's what God has allotted to us. It's what God has made possible in our life, and we can just see it. We just know this one. Rest in Him, found in Christ, then you can enjoy these things. If it isn't, then we invite you to Christ, and life becomes something that you can enjoy. Well, with prayer, ask that He would teach us this in more profound ways and help now. In fact, you're the only seasons that life finds us in. See the season that good seasons. Some are really terrible fun at all. These were not what we looked for. We reckoned we needed you. And in these moments, to recognize your sovereign hand, your justice, your righteousness, we can find help. Help that would help us just to today. Say, God, I just want to walk with you in this moment, whatever it is. Receiving the gifts that you give in it. And if they're gone tomorrow, that's fine. When we get to see you, that's fine. I'll leave these things behind in a heartbeat. Can't wait to see you face to face. Because this world isn't what I'm living for. This world and all that it has is a paper plate to me, Father. My life is in you. I'm thankful for that. And I pray that you'd help us to know that and walk in that and walk with you. We ask for that tonight as we trust this to you. In Jesus' name, amen.
If you're able